Hello, everyone. My name is Mackenzie, and today I'm going to guide you through the Student Learning Commons workshop discussing the top things to know about academic writing. Before I get started, however, I would like to take the time to acknowledge that I work, live, and play on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples, and the Student Learning Commons also operates on these ancestral lands. Today, we'll be discussing the top 5 things to know about academic writing. First, we'll discuss the necessity of understanding and planning your assignment, and we will then talk about the importance of creating sound, reasonable arguments. Next, we'll talk about how you can organize your claims and evidence to make them as effective as possible. After this, we'll discuss why it is important to revise your paragraphs, style, and expression, and we will then talk about help and support you can reach out for along the way. The first point we'll be discussing is understanding and planning your assignment. Before we begin an assignment, it's very important to understand what is expected of us. After all, if you don't know what the criteria is or what your instructor wants to see, how are you going to write a paper that addresses these requirements? A great place to start when trying to understand your assignment is by looking at the guidelines your instructor provides you. Sometimes this will include a rubric, an assignment outline, or a dedicated section in your syllabus listing what exactly your instructor wants to see. Take this example. Here, your instructor has told you that the topic is social media and information, which is a super broad topic. And they've then narrowed down the scope of this by asking you to, quote, explain the relationship between social media and how we produce, distribute, and consume information, and discuss the social implications. Choose a very specific focus, end quote. This gives us a ton of information on what our instructor wants to see in our paper. So, to better understand this, you may want to start by breaking this down into each of the individual pieces of information that are being presented. For example, point 1 might be to explain the relationship between social media and how we produce, distribute, and consume information. Point 2 could be to discuss the social implications of this. And point 3 could be to ensure that you choose a very specific focus. These points will then inform how you approach your paper. The instructor here has also included very specific formatting requirements, such as a specified length, minimum number of sources to be used, a specified citation style, and a due date. These are all also important pieces of information that will help you determine how you approach your paper. For example, seeing that the length requirement is 2,500 words, you know that you can explain things in greater detail and go into a lot more depth than if the word limit was, say, 500 words. Additionally, if the due date is close, you know that you will likely need to dedicate time to this paper sooner rather than later, and that you might just have to pick a topic and stick to it because you won't have time to start over if you decide to change your topic later. Once you are sure that you understand your assignment, you can start to plan how you're going to tackle it. A great strategy here is to make yourself a list of mini deadlines, working backwards from your due date. For example, my last step might be to format my reference list, which I can do the day before my assignment is due. And my second last step might be to write my concluding paragraph, which I can do a few days before my deadline. Setting mini deadlines for yourself is a great way to make sure that you stay on track and that you don't push off your paper until the very last minute, because that will just end up being more stressful in the long run. The assignment calculator tool really helps with this process and can be accessed through the SFU Library's website. Check it out. Once you've planned how you're going to tackle your paper, it's time to get motivated. Here, you may want to ask yourself what motivates or intrigues you and what makes you want to learn more. It may also be helpful to review class notes and readings, consider experiences you've gone through, talk to other people, or see what sort of news or current events is happening. Hopefully, by doing all of this, you're able to find a relevant topic that is of interest to you and that you can base your paper around, or at least a few general ideas of topics you may want to focus on. Who knows? If you find a topic that inspires and motivates you, you may even actually enjoy writing your paper. Now that you've hopefully identified some potential topics that motivate and interest you, you'll want to try focusing these potential topics. For example, if I found that dogs interest and motivate me, I might want to focus this a bit more by asking myself what sort of dogs motivate me, or what behaviors or characteristics of dogs I find the most interesting. This will help narrow the focus of my paper and help me come up with a specific topic or claim I wish to make. One great strategy to help focus your topic is a mind map, where you show how different ideas connect to one another. Another strategy is to ask yourself questions that may prompt interesting thoughts or ideas that you can further explore. Once you've come up with a topic, it's time to do some research. However, it's important that you look in the right places. While popular non-academic sources like magazines may be great when you're looking for inspiration, they generally aren't good places to look for information because they are designed to sell stories or products. Instead, you may want to consider looking at scholarly sources like academic journals or scholarly books, as these sources are specifically aimed at sharing ideas and research findings with fellow experts. These sources also have a peer review process that ensures the legitimacy of the content and also provides much more in-depth discussions, information, explanations, and statistics. Now, you might still be wondering what the difference is between peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed sources. If so, keep in mind that peer-reviewed sources are written by scholars, typically submitted to a journal, and they then go through a process where other scholars, who are usually experts in the field, review the article before it can be published. Here, the reviewers will provide feedback and make comments about improvements that need to be made, which will then be sent back to the author, and the author will have to address these comments and resubmit their article. So this is a lot different from something like a blog, for example, where you can just write whatever you want, whatever comes to mind, and post it without anyone else's input and without vetting the legitimacy of the information. Instead, peer-reviewed sources ensure that the content of the source is checked and verified before it can be published, so readers can be confident that the information in these articles is accurate. Moving on to our second step, we now want to use the information we've found to create sound arguments. So you hopefully have a lot of the ideas and information you want to include in your paper, but now it's time to figure out how you can effectively organize this information into coherent arguments. A great strategy to use here is to consider the who, what, when, and why of your argument. The who is who the reader or target audience is going to be. So take a minute to think about who your target audience is and how you can tailor your paper to fit that audience. The why is the overall purpose of your argument. What is the purpose of your argument and why does it matter? It's also important to consider the context of the sources you are citing. Why were these sources written? When were they written? Is the information out of date or is it still relevant? What patterns of argument do you notice? Finally, you'll want to make sure that you include convincing, credible, and sufficient evidence. However, you also have to ensure that you position this evidence in the way that makes it effective. For example, if I had 100 pieces of evidence, it may be more effective for me to only discuss the 5 most powerful pieces of evidence in my paper, because the other 95 less powerful pieces of evidence may bore or distract my reader. Ensuring you have sufficient and convincing evidence is the bedrock of many great arguments. When you're looking through your sources, you also want to look for any sense that you see. By this, I mean, when looking across all your sources, try to find recurring terms or themes that are present in these sources or resonate with your position. If you're able to find recurring themes that are in line with their own arguments, these are great pieces to incorporate into your paper, and they may even indicate that the field favors your position. As you make sense of your sources and start to create sound arguments, you're building a clear claim. A claim is any statement that requires proof or evidence. An example of a claim is that online music streaming should not replace hard copy media. As you can see, this claim clearly requires evidence to back it up because other people may disagree with it. In academic writing, a claim comes from your reaction to a source's argument, as well as connections you may have made among ideas across sources. While a claim is not the same thing as a thesis, a claim is certainly necessary in building a thesis. Once you have a claim, your next step is to analyze it. So here you'll want to come up with reasons why your claim is true. These reasons can be logical, or they can be backed up by information or evidence from your sources, and it's important to also consider what sort of assumptions or qualifiers may be underlying your claims or reasons. For example, If I were making the claim that online music streaming should replace hard copy media, a reason for this may be that it is cheaper, but an assumption I'm making here would be that people prefer cheaper options. A qualifier here, however, would be that people only want a cheaper option if it is still good quality. Reasons, assumptions, and qualifiers are all important to consider and be aware of when analyzing your claim. Once you've come up with a claim and fully analyzed it, you can start working on your thesis statement. A thesis statement is made up of the central claim or argument of your paper, as well as a forecast of the main points your paper will cover. A thesis generally conveys a logical relationship between 2 or 3 factors that converge to create the roadmap of the main points of your paper. This helps your reader get an idea of what you're going to be arguing in your paper so they can prepare themselves for the upcoming discussion. However, it's vital that your thesis is debatable. If your thesis statement is just a fact, like 2 + 2 = 4, then there's no discussion to be had because there's no argument that can be made against your claim. However, if my thesis was that dogs are the best pets to have because they're fluffy and friendly, a cat person could argue against this and say that cats are better. So this is an example of a debatable statement. As you start drafting your thesis, also keep in mind that your thesis at this point doesn't have to be set in stone. Rather, you can come up with a working thesis to guide you through your paper, and you can then come back and revise this thesis later after the argument you are making develops throughout your writing. A draft of your thesis may even be what we call a working thesis, which is essentially there to help guide you, the author, as you write your paper to ensure that you stay on track and don't explore arguments that are irrelevant to your claim. A working thesis will be changed and revised as you write, but it's important to have at least a working thesis to help guide you through the writing process. Eventually, you will have a final thesis, which will present a clear, debatable claim on a specific issue, and it will also indicate reasons why your claim may be true, which you will unpack later in your paper. It's also vital to organize your claims in the ways that you believe to be most effective. So try to organize your claims in a way that makes them easy to understand and that makes them their most persuasive. Often, authors put their 2 strongest arguments as their first and last body paragraphs to make sure these are very apparent to their reader. Nevertheless, however you decide to organize your claims, they should be clearly connecting to specific evidence and to each other. Consider the question of so what, as this may also be helpful here to ensure that your reader understands why the claims you are making actually matter and why they're important. When figuring out how to organize your claims in your paper as a whole, it's also very helpful to make outlines. Here, you can make point form notes and move these around to see how they fit together, or you can even come up with topic sentences for each paragraph that you wish to write. If you'd like to learn more about outlining, also check out the outlining workshop provided on the Student Learning Commons website. Sentence outlining can also be helpful if you're struggling to build focused, coherent paragraphs. Keep in mind that different processes work for everyone, so really just try to find the strategy or system that works best for you. If you'd like to know more about sentence outlining, please check out the link at the bottom of the page. Once you have a draft or are close to having a draft, go back through this and revise your paragraphs. Make sure that each paragraph begins with a topic sentence that communicates a key idea and has a purpose. You will also want to make sure that this idea is then fully developed in the rest of your paper and that specific details, such as evidence from your sources, are used to develop this. Show how your sentences and the ideas communicated in your sentences connect both with each other and with your central idea or topic. When you get to the end of your paragraph, you may also want to further address the question of so what? Why does the argument you have made in this paragraph matter? And what implications does the argument have? Understanding this will clarify to your reader what exactly your argument, addressing this will clarify to your reader that your argument does in fact matter. There are also plenty of strategies you can use when editing your paper. For example, reading out loud is a great way to identify awkward sentences or phrasing and grammar or spelling errors. Having someone else read your paper will also help lend a new perspective and often will help identify issues that the author may have overlooked. If you find there are areas in your paper that you are unhappy with, but you aren't sure how to improve on them, circle these and come back to them later with a fresh set of eyes. It can also be helpful to review and apply feedback from an instructor or a TA, work with someone from the Student Learning Commons to help identify and learn how to navigate challenges you may be facing, or use resources from the Student Learning Commons for further practice. Now, we've arrived at the last step, which is to get help when you need it. At the SLC, we offer all sorts of services, and you're paying for these in your tuition, so you might as well take advantage of them. We can help you with every part of your paper, from planning and outlining to writing the thesis statement to integrating sources to revision and proofreading. And trust me, we love doing it. There are also services at the library that can help you with finding sources, narrowing down your search, and using the correct citation style appropriately. So please do check out what the library has to offer. So with that, I will leave you. Thanks once again for viewing this workshop, and I hope to see you at the SLC soon.